The AEC software companies are growing really fast, like 10 to 15%. Who wouldn't be envious of that? And it's a highly profitable, segment of the market. With all these individual tools that are disparate and don't really work together, who's left to do all the hard work to integrate all this stuff together? Well, it falls on, the end user, right? He's got to be the one who connects all the dots.
Welcome to another episode of the Next Generation Design Podcast. I'm your host, Jennifer Piper. Today, we're talking about the architecture, engineering, and construction industry and why tech advances there have been relatively stagnant for the past few decades. In this episode, I'm talking with Derek England, product manager at Siemens Digital Industries Software for AEC and BIM. In part one of our three-part series with Derek, we're discussing trends in the AEC industry, improving tech implementation, and why integration may be key to widespread adoption. Before we begin, let's meet today's guests. Derek, welcome to the episode. Would you please introduce yourself to the audience?
I'm Derek England. I'm the NX product manager for AEC and BIM at Siemens Digital Industries Software. I've been doing this for 25 years now, and I've had the privilege of working, with some of the most innovative companies in the world, understanding their workflows, helping them achieve their goals, and my job is really to understand these and then make and suggest enhancements to our product to make it even better so that they're even more productive.
Thank you, Derek, for joining today and talking to us about the challenges that are facing AEC companies as they evolve and streamline the design, engineering, and construction processes. Can you give us a little bit of an overview on the topic?
It's a challenge today to make sure that all these projects are done on time and on budget. And one of the big challenges is coordinating these design activities, especially between general contractor and subcontractors, and ensuring that we're all working from the same page, right? It's particularly challenging because there's just a lot of user errors and inefficiencies, and the really innovative companies that are really pushing the envelope, trying to get best practices and best processes utilized in their company, they aren't satisfied with the current set of tools out there. It feels like these tools are disconnected and disjointed, and trying to pull together all these disparate tools, it's a real challenge.
What key trends do you see emerging in the AEC industry? What do some of those challenges look like in a real world setting?
Some of the challenges are that the construction companies that are in this, the profit margins are really thin. So if you can compare it to like automotive or aerospace or machinery, the profit margins are like on the level of like retail. So these are companies that are, must be really efficient. They don't have room to go over budget and lose, on these projects. But they also experience a lot of project overruns and delays because of issues, that they discover, on site. But it's also really innovative industry.
Can you tell us about some of the most recent innovations you've seen in this area?
Today, there's so many new innovations and improved software and new construction technologies. I mean, they've got stuff like some of the scanning technology. They've got 360-degree cameras. They've got drones that are scanning work sites, making, this process of scanning just so much easier. I mean, they even have like a robotic dog that walks around scanning stuff through like hallways. It's like right out of sci-fi. It's really cool stuff. We also see a lot of use of virtual reality now too. You see owner operators are able to put on VR headsets and start basically immersing themselves in the design very early, which is great because when they're there and they can see it, they can visualize it, accurately. And so as things progress, they don't say, oh, I'm surprised by this. I wish this was different. Maybe we should change this, because they know, very early what the final result is. And so they really, this gives a much better way to interact with the owner operator. So in fewer things.
Are there any real world examples that you could give us that talk about the process at work?
It was really cool. They had this one example where a guy sat down in a theater that they were designing, and he said, what does the stage look like, from this vantage point? And then he moved over, sat somewhere else, and he could see what the stage looked like from that vantage point. What are the what are the beams or columns that are obstructing the view? And you could see that right from the seat. So it was really fascinating and great use of VR technology.
What advancements are you seeing in regards to the metaverse?
Metaverse is really cool because, so like in construction, software has its place, right? We design it and then it goes off to construction and you can use it to refer back to the original design and things like that. But metaverse is all design, right? It's all software. And so it gives you this, this is our world now, right? Our software, is used to design things. And then you explore that world, in the metaverse. And so really, this is a great opportunity for us. There is no construction side. It's just software, just creating. And so it gives you a lot of flexibility for people, too, to explore and create these worlds that you couldn't otherwise. We went to you think about in LA, I like cars, and the Peterson Car Museum is really cool. And but most of the cars are down hidden away in a garage that you don't really go see, right? Wouldn't it be cool to have this infinite size showroom where you could highlight different cars? So instead of having a finite spot that you could showcase cars in their museum, you could have almost an infinite space to showcase things. So the metaverse is really pretty exciting, and it really hits the target market for design.
Are there any particularly exciting themes that you've seen emerging in this area?
Modular and prefabricated construction. I mean, this is really, evolving and accelerating. If you have to build on site, you have to take a whole crew and move them somewhere, put them on site for a period of time. And it can take a long time, especially, in remote areas, it's really difficult. And so to be able to build it, in a kind of a factory setting and then assemble it on site within a period of a day or two, that's changing the industry.
With all these innovations, what impact have you seen on the construction industry in particular?
You see lots of these point solutions getting creative. And so it does improve that particular need, right? But we also see... construction productivity over the last 20 years hasn't really improved, according to Deloitte. They did a study and they kind of showed, what's going on, productivity-wise, construction versus general machinery, and then also automotive. And what you see is companies, that are doing automotive, per person, they're 60% more productive today than they were 20 years ago. But in construction, it really is still pretty flat. Now, it's not just because of software, but it kind of calls out that basically we're not getting more efficient in construction area, right? We're pretty flat. And all these point solutions are improving little, steps of the process. We're not seeing the big dramatic gains like we see in automotive and other industries.
Why do you think that is? That this new technology isn't being implemented as expected?
You do see companies are investing in improving their design processes. They really are trying to leverage this new capabilities. And sometimes it's pushed by, government regulations. Governments will say, you need to have a 3D model to represent this project or this building or whatever. And so they are adopting it because, they're required to. And so... But we still see the old same processes are still there as well. So it's yes, you need a 3D model, but I also want to have 2D drawings as well. And the 2D drawing is the master. So they are kind of realizing some steps, small elements of improvement, but not big gains like you'd expect, right? And it's a little bit mystifying because it's not like they're not spending money on software, because the AEC design software business has been growing at a very high pace, right? So the software is growing at 10 to 15%, but productivity is not increasing by 10 to 15%. And so there's a mismatch. It seems like, yes, we're providing solutions here, but the solutions aren't having a big impact. They're having small impacts. You
said there was a bit of an improvement in AEC productivity, but not nearly as much as other industries. Why do you think that might be?
So Deloitte estimates that there's a 5% improvement over this time, right? And automotive is about 60%. So there's a dramatic difference there. CEOs are starting to kind of scratch their head and say, why is there such a large discrepancy? What can we learn from these other industries? What can I learn from automotive, or what can I learn from machinery? How do they do things? Is that something we can adopt? And is it so different that we can't leverage some of their best practices and design, manufacturing techniques in construction? And so it's a tricky question. And so they're still struggling to try to figure out, why aren't we getting better productivity?
Are there best practices that are used in other industries that could also be leveraged in the engineering and construction industry?
Some things are unique, right? With AEC, right? There's a lot of local regulations. So you've got you've got local, you've got state, you've got government, federal government type regulations for construction. And so some of those things, it takes time to do inspections for all the different disciplines. So that is an impact, right? And that doesn't decrease over time. It's always more, right? So that's impacting some of the productivities because you need to have these checks and balances as part of AEC. So it's not just on the software side. There's also challenges in the labor market, right? We've seen that for every 2 people that retire from the labor market, we're only getting replaced by 1. And so they're struggling. They're saying, I need to be more productive, right? I have to get to this level where I can do twice as much with one person because that's what I've got available to me now, right? But in addition to that, there are so many opportunities for us to improve the design process, in the digital space as well.
With the lack of adoption and implementation so far, where do you see space for these improvements to really be made?
There's this funny article, or I've seen it on Huffington Post, and I've seen it on Pinterest and things like that. It's a Radio Shack ad from 1991. This page shows 15 different products that were on sale for President's Day, and you look at all these products and they're individual products. So they had things like, they'd have a phone, they had an answering machine, they had a camera, they had a clock, they had an alarm clock, they had headphones, they had, all these different products, right? And then you look at that now, and 13 of the 15 of these products are probably on your smartphone right now, right? Yep. Your phone can certainly make phone calls. It can do voicemails. It can take pictures and videos. It can record your voice. It can play music. It's a calculator. It tells the time, the weather. It can be used for word processing and playing games. It's all these things can be done on your phone. And so, over time, things got better, and what's really cool is that a lot of these things are integrated together, right? So I have a contact. I can look up, Jen Piper on my contact, and I can just say, call her immediately, right? I don't have to write down her number, go over to a different device, and then call, right? If I wanted to take a picture and store that, it's not like I have to take a picture, scan it, and then put it on my computer. All these things integrated together just offers a ton of benefit, right? That they're all integrated together. And all these point solutions have really become obsolete.
It really is pretty incredible how much those capabilities have changed over the last 30 years and the innovations that have been made. What can we specifically learn from the Radio Shack example?
Today in the AEC software market, there's lots of these innovative capabilities, being developed. And these companies, like I talked about, the AEC software companies are growing really fast, 10 to 15%. Who wouldn't be envious of that? And it's a highly profitable, segment of the market. But with all these individual, integrated individual tools that are disparate and don't really work together, who's left to do all the hard work to integrate all this stuff together? Well, it falls on, the end user, right? He's got to be the one who connects all the dots. I'm going to integrate all these things together.
It seems like better, more cohesive integration might just be the key to this problem. Are you seeing steps being made to actively work towards this?
Software vendors, are beginning to recognize this weakness, right? Even last year, the Autodesk CEO, he, in response to an open letter to Autodesk saying we're frustrated, from the users, he basically came out and said at the users group, he said, Autodesk still has a lot of work to do on the technology that supports its products. The company has scores of different software titles used by different kinds of architects, engineers, and designs, not all of them share data easily. And so he laid out a 5-year plan to put this thing together.
Do you see that as a reasonable timeline for such a major advancement?
As somebody who works in the software segment and who have gone through many acquisitions and integrating the software into core, software, it's hard work. You have to get the data models lined up and to be able to have this seamless integrated, ability to kind of work seamlessly between these applications. 5 years is incredibly optimistic, right? It's hard work. Or the other option is you don't really build a tight integration and you have some kind of neutral file that you're sharing behind the scenes, which doesn't really give you a robust way to share data or build, tight integrations between the products. So it's a lot of work to do on their side, by the AC company's side, to kind of pull together and integrate all these things. And we just haven't seen an appetite in most AC companies to integrate their products. They're happy to have them be point solutions.
So if their productivity is so profoundly affected, why do you think there hasn't been bigger pushback from these AEC companies?
That was like part of the open letter. But it is kind of a quiet, angst going on with the users. That there was that open letter to the Autodesk CEO a couple of years ago. But you also see it at like presentations at conference. HOK is this large US-based architectural engineering firm, and Greg Schleusner he's the director of design and technology, and his job is constantly evaluating technology to make sure they have the best processes for HOK employees. And he gave this great presentation called Road to Nowhere, based on the song, I think by Talking Heads, right? And he kind of used that as kind of his mantra. So he was just talking about like how, you have this integration of products, and every single product is kind of like is a place where you dump data, right, into a hole. And then the humans are left to kind of pick up the data out of one hole, configure it, and dump it into the next hole, right? And it's just a constant process of just moving data from point A to point B. And they're at the heart of the ones who have to move this data. And his feeling is like, why does the human have to be at the center of this to kind of connect all these different tools?
Derek, I'm curious. Can you tell us a bit about what you've been hearing firsthand from Siemens customers? With all these issues identified, it seems like there may be some possible solutions.
I noticed that that we had these customers, not from our traditional industries like aerospace and automotive and machinery, that were using our product for doing things like bridge design or tunnels or railways, and it got me curious, like why are these companies using something that's not a traditional BIM tool to do BIM work? BIM is building information modeling. Most people see BIM as like the pinnacle of I've got a rich 3D representation of my model with all the information required for the manufacturing and construction embedded into the model, right? That's the information part of it. And so, if you have that rich set of data, then you can start to build this digital twin, because you've got all the information on the design side that can be extracted and leveraged throughout like this digital thread through the whole digital twin.
And what was the feedback that you got from them?
I've met with several of these customers and have been working with them over the years now. For example, like Max Bugel, they're a 100-year-old German construction company, one of the largest construction companies in Germany. It's a $2 billion annual revenue company in Germany. And about 10 to 15 years ago, they realized that their designs were becoming really complex, and it was really too difficult and error prone to design and document, and manufacture complex designs using, with their current set of tools, right? And so they said, well, what would happen if we, explored an integrated set of tools? And so they initially kind of started with NX for manufacturing, and then they realized, well, there's a lot of benefits if I have an integrated solution between the design and the manufacturing. Whenever I make a change in the design, the manufacturing just kind of updates, right? And then the same with simulation as well. If I make a change to the model, I don't have to go reapply all the boundary conditions or loads anymore. I can just update them because I've got an integrated set of tools, and it just saved them so much time that they decided that we're going to go with NX and start using NX more and more. And then when it came time for their modular, modular department Max module, they said, well, we need to integrate structural, we need to do electrical, we need to do piping, we need to do, concrete. There's all these different disciplines together. What do we use, right? And so they decided to go ahead and use NX. And from that, for them, they say, Teamcenter and NX is really the ultimate BIM solution.
So it seems like that concept of collaboration between technologies remains the key to the entire puzzle here.
I just bought a used home. It was about 20 years old. Everything needed to be replaced. And so when I did it, I replaced all the appliances, and it was well, this is, I'm going to do high-end appliances. I do all these smart appliances. So I have smart, smart oven, a smart fridge, smart washer dryer, smart lock on the front door. I've got a smart doorbell. I've got a smart thermostat. And I'm like, man, this is so cool, right? And my even got my teenage son's attention. He's like, Dad, it's so cool. We've got a smart house. And so my son was telling me how cool our smart house was. I think the washer stopped, cycle was over, and it popped up in my TV screen. And he's like, oh, Dad, it just showed up. It showed me my washing's done on the TV. And I'm like, it's so cool that we have a smart house. And my wife, she's always very skeptical. And so she said, oh, how smart is it? She goes, Alexa, turn the thermostat down to 75 degrees. And then Alexa says, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know what a house is. And so how smart really was this? And, yes, eventually I could build that integration in. I could teach Alexa, how to interoperate with these things. And that's effectively what a lot of our, these companies are doing. That these tools don't naturally talk to each other, out of the box. So you kind of have to teach them. And there's a lot of rework and there's customization that needs to occur.
And that integration isn't necessarily the simplest thing to do and implement, is it?
That's the challenge, is that you have these great individual solutions and they can kind of talk to each other. But when you roll it all up, do you have that smart, tightly integrated set of products? And that's the challenge that we see. Imagine that's just my house. Imagine what a building has to do, right?
Oh
with
God,
fire
yeah.
sensors and with, plumbing for fire suppression and, things to understand whether doors are open or closed and, all these things that need to be monitored, right? And who's going to monitor it? How do you pull all this together?
I would imagine it's even more complex than on the AEC level.
They have these capabilities for electrical, they have capabilities for plumbing, and they have ones for HVAC and structural steel. All of these things, they have these individual tools, and then on top of that, you need to analyze how they work together, and then you need to simulate that. It's a real difficult situation trying to integrate all these tools to get a good solution. And it feels a little bit like some of the software vendors are a little deaf to this challenge, right? It's only now being highlighted in the last 6 months that you hear anyone talking about this challenge. But it's really at the heart of where these challenges occur, and the lack of productivity, achieving improved productivity. I think that's really at the heart of why we can't improve productivity.
You mentioned briefly before the use of the digital twin. I'd like to know how integrated multidiscipline BIM design works with the digital twin.
The BIM is really just the capturing of the data, and making sure you have all the data in one location with all the information required to flow downstream, right? And so the digital twin really enables the loop back mechanism, right? So I want to make sure that if I find issues, right, during the construction process, I can build that back into my original design so that future projects will look for this issue and ensure that we avoid these issues, right? So the digital twin really enables me to capture this information and knowledge and embed it so that next time I can learn and be better, more productive.
Can you expand a bit on that concept of the digital twin and the loopback mechanism?
Today, every single project is a bespoke project, right? And it feels like we tend to make the same mistakes over and over again because we're not able to learn, put into our design process the things we learned from past projects, right? And so that's what the digital twin enables us to do, and it enables us to actually realistically simulate, in the physical world, in the digital space. So if I had a problem, right, in the physical world, I could go immediately to my digital twin and said, okay, what's impacting that? What's connected to that? And I can find everything that's associated with that problem, right? Because it's all tied together with the digital twin. And the digital thread we don't talk a lot about, like in the area of AEC, but it really is the ability to flow this information between all the applications, right? And today there's talk about like OpenBIM, like having a standard that basically everybody writes to, and so we can all read this. So today things like neutral file formats like IFC are promoting like openness, right? So if everyone outputs IFC, that's great. And then we can read this information in, and a lot of that data is preserved, BIM information that's embedded into the geometry. And then you have the geometry as well. But really, what's the level of integration there? Am I going to be able to identify like manufacturing operations were applied to this face here during a change? Am I going to understand how to react to that change? What about labeling of faces and edges to enable, simulation to update automatically when I make a change? So that digital thread, you want it to be really robust so that when you make a change, it propagates through all the applications.
Before we go, I'd like to look forward a bit. Where do you see some of these AEC trends going, say, in the next 3 to 5 years?
Definitely, like we talked about today, integration between disciplines has to improve, right? I think that's a huge inhibitor to, making great productivity gains, right? The currently, you hear a lot of vendors talk about like an open standard, and that's really the easiest thing to do is if I can I don't have to worry about integrating it. I just output something and then somebody else has to move it, from one application to the next. So a lot of people are talking about this open standard, but not really taking accountability of how that's going to work with the next downstream application, right? And so I think that's what's going to change is people are not going to be happy having a person at the center of this moving data from here to here and having to do the hard work of integrating and find changes, right? That's hard work, and there's no value added there. It's just trying to replicate what I have in this system in this other system, and I have a lot of work to do to do that.
Where do you see an endpoint for that integration obstacle?
Today, people are still, convinced that this best in breed type solution where I buy an application that's hyper focused on exactly what I want to do. And for somebody that does like steel construction or steel structures, that's all I do. It's great. I just use this. And then I throw it over the wall to my general contractor and say, you deal with it now. And so the general contractor has to deal with it. And if there are issues or changes, he has to communicate it back to that person. And so if everybody uses their own tool and just kind of throws it over the wall, that mentality can't exist, in the future. There has to be this idea of integration. And you see this more, right? You see like, it used to be very, design, bid, build. That was the kind of the working method in this industry. And now you see a lot more design and build. So the person who designs it has to also build it. And so there is more collaboration working now, but it's still being done with just like disparate tools, right? And when you try to, do it with disparate tools and you're trying to use some kind of common open tool to, open format to kind of connect these things, the whole process is only as good as your weakest link, right? And so I feel like things will get better little bit by little bit, and then somebody's just going to say, this is not workable. This is not scalable. I need to have a tightly integrated solution. I need a software vendor who's going to, understand this and provide me an integrated set of tools. So, I can accomplish these things and make changes very easily, and the impact of these changes are well understood and communicated to all the different downstream applications, right? So I think you'll see a lot more people looking to say, okay, I understand we need to look at this holistically, not like discipline by discipline.
So Derek, this is just part one of our conversation. I wonder, can you give our listeners a preview into the next couple of episodes that we'll be covering in the next few weeks?
We're going to talk about collaboration between people, right? Today we talked a lot about collaboration of tools, different softwares, but tomorrow we're going to talk about just the challenges with, people collaborating together and working together in a shared space.
Thank you so much to Derek for joining us today on the Next Generation Design podcast. Stay tuned for episodes 2 and 3 of this series. Thanks also to our listeners for joining us today. Join in next time as we discuss more about latest design innovations and software applications. I'm your host, Jennifer Piper, and this has been Next Generation Design.